Before we start, smash that like button, hit subscribe and drop a comment below. Would you dare to tell a monster a bedtime story? Now, let's begin. The security doors hissed open with a pneumatic sigh, revealing a corridor soaked in white light and tension so thick it almost had a scent. Dr. Mara Lorne stepped inside the facility's restricted wing without hesitation, her boots clicking against the pristine floor like a metronome counting down to something no one wanted to face. She didn't look like someone qualified to confront what was locked in cell 9. Late 30s, soft-voiced, brown curls coiled in an uncooperative bun. No armor, no rank insignia, just a gray lab coat and a satchel full of tablets and books. The guards on either side of her, both armed with pulse rifles and half-buried trauma, watched her like she was a civilian strolling through a minefield. "Dr. Lorne," one guard said, trying to keep his voice level, "we'll give you 10 minutes inside. If it moves, if it so much as blinks wrong, we're pulling you out." "If it wanted me dead," she replied calmly, "I'd already be a smear on the floor, wouldn't I?" Neither of them answered. On the other side of reinforced glass and kinetic shielding, Subject Theta 9 crouched in silence. It had no name, no language, no past, at least not one the military or science teams could decipher. What it did have was a kill count and a presence that defied classification. It was too precise to be a beast, too patient to be mindless, and too focused to be incidental. It had murdered 2 scientists and 1 handler during intake. Another soldier during an attempted blood draw. It didn't eat. It didn't sleep. Just watched. And waited. Inside its cell, the temperature was lowered to stress-inducing levels. The lights flickered on unpredictable timers. The walls, built with plasma-forged steel, bore no marks, until Theta 9 had carved them. Not words. Not drawings. Just geometric scratches like forgotten sigils, as though it were writing its own cage into memory. Mara approached the observation chamber, lowering herself into the central chair with the composure of a woman sitting down for tea. The technicians behind the viewing wall murmured nervously, monitoring vitals, defense triggers and auto-lockdown systems. Their eyes flicked between her and the creature, like spectators unwilling to place bets. Theta 9 didn't move. It was crouched low, coiled like a spring of sinew and obsidian-plated armor. Its eyes glowed a soft, unnatural violet, a contradiction to its brutal form. Everything about it looked sharp, wrong, and ancient, like it belonged on a battlefield painted in ash, not a research cell bathed in artificial light. Mara opened her bag slowly and pulled out a book. A physical one, bound in soft leather and worn at the edges. "You don't know me," she said gently, her voice threaded with something careful and unthreatening. "But I thought you might like a story tonight." Theta 9 blinked. No growl. No lunge. Just the stillness of something that had stopped reacting a long time ago. Or perhaps, had started listening. She didn't expect a reply. She read anyway. Her voice filled the room, soft and steady. Not clinical. Not scared. She read from an old Earth tale, The Forest King and the Moonchild, about a monstrous guardian who once protected the last grove on a dying planet. It wasn't a tale of victory. It was one of endurance, of protecting something fragile in a world that had stopped caring. Mara didn't glance at the cameras. She didn't look for reactions. She just read. Slowly. Clearly. With the rhythm of someone who remembered what stories were before they became distractions. 15 minutes passed. Theta 9 didn't move a muscle. But the monitors told a different story. Heart rate decreased. Respiratory patterns stabilized. Neural activity shifted from aggression markers to complex synaptic bursts, an indicator of focused attention. When Mara reached the final line, "And so the forest slept, not in fear but in peace, for it knew the king would watch until the stars returned," the creature exhaled. It was almost a sigh. She closed the book. Stood slowly. Behind the shielded wall, a technician whispered, "Is it sedated?" "No," said the chief xenobiologist, eyes glued to the vitals. "It's listening." Mara gave the creature one last glance. "I'll be back tomorrow?" Theta 9 shifted slightly, just a tilt of the head. For any other being, it would be meaningless. But Mara saw it. And so did the command AI. That night, the logs recorded something unprecedented. The predator didn't move for 7 hours. No pacing. No agitation. Its claws retracted. Its eyes remained open, fixed on the chair Mara had sat in. The next morning, when she returned with a different book, it was already waiting by the observation window. The guards raised their weapons immediately. Theta 9 didn't move. Just watched. Mara didn't hesitate. She entered the chamber, pulled out a new story and sat. "Today," she said, smiling faintly, "we'll read about a prince who didn't want to fight anymore." She didn't look to see if the monster understood, but it did. And somewhere deep in the void of its mind, something scarred and ancient stirred, not rage, not hunger, recognition. The sixth story ended with the same silence that had followed the five before it, but this time Mara didn't get up right away. Theta 9 remained by the reinforced glass, motionless. Its violet eyes tracked her like twin lanterns in a sea of darkness, not with predatory calculation, but with something that resembled, if only distantly, curiosity. She stayed seated, cross-legged. Come. Her voice broke the quiet. Do you know what a lullaby is? It didn't respond, of course. No creature had ever looked less likely to hum a tune. But she asked anyway, letting the question hang in the air like breath on cold glass. They're not really for the child, she continued, folding her hands over the cover of the worn storybook. They're for the mother. To remind herself that someone, somewhere, can still be safe. Even if it's just for the length of a song. Theta 9 tilted its head. A fractional movement. An almost imperceptible narrowing of its eye slits. But it was the most expressive gesture she'd seen from it since its capture. From the monitoring booth, the technicians whispered. It reacts to her tone changes, one said. It's anticipating her pauses, added another. Could be mirroring behavior. Primitive learning response. No, said Commander Halvers, arms crossed over his dark uniform, face carved in stone. It's waiting. His voice shut the room up instantly. Mara ignored them. She always did. There was no room for them in the space she shared with the creature. No equations, no threat assessments. Just words. Just stories. And something buried beneath scales and armor that hadn't yet decided what it wanted from her. Later that day the report came through. Subject Theta 9 had etched new marks into the titanium floor of its containment cell. Unlike the previous chaotic gouges, these were clean. Deliberate. Shapes. Not alphabet. Not numerals. But symbols. Mara was the first to see them. She studied the overhead scan, heart drumming a strange rhythm against her ribs. The shapes weren't just random. They repeated. One resembled a mountain split down the center. Another looked like a downward spiral beside a hollow circle. A third, more haunting than the rest, was unmistakably a stick figure standing beside a larger, jagged form. She showed it to the facility linguist. He shrugged. Could be stress-induced repetition. Coping mechanism. She showed it to the AI cognition analyst. It ran simulations and returned inconclusive probabilities. Possible precursors to a semantic set, it concluded. Insufficient data. But when she showed it to Theta 9 the next session, drawing the spiral shape with her fingertip on the polyglass, it pressed a claw to the mirrored surface directly beneath it. They were communicating. Crude. Basic. But unmistakable. The facility director called it an anomaly. The commander called it dangerous. But Mara called it a beginning. And beginnings mattered. Especially here. The facility, known only as Station Hesperus, wasn't designed for communication. It was a holding cell at the edge of known space, a steel vault orbiting a gas giant, buried under 100 protocols and one unspoken truth. Everything that came here was either going to be weaponized, or erased. Theta 9's timer was already running. Mara knew this. She saw the way the soldiers flinched when they walked past its cell. She noticed the subtle increase in oversight, the newer soldiers posted with heavier gear. The whispered rumors about moving Theta 9 to an extraction chamber. When she confronted Halvers directly, his reply was cold and absolute. Your rapport is noted, Doctor. But let's be clear. It is a hostile unknown. Not a guest. Not a refugee. You have 72 hours before control of the subject transfers to tactical research. After that, it's off your leash. She opened her mouth to argue. He didn't give her the chance. 3 days, he said. And count yourself lucky. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she reviewed every log, every clip, every slowed-down frame of interaction. She cataloged breathing rhythms. A dilation. Subtle twitches in its jawline when she spoke certain phrases. Theta 9 responded to story arcs that ended in redemption. It visibly tensed when tales included betrayal. It leaned forward when she used metaphors and looked away when she used technical terms. It didn't blink when she spoke of monsters. But when she told the story of the little boy who waited by the sea for his missing sister, it turned away entirely. Not out of disinterest. Out of grief. The next day, Mara entered the chamber without her usual book. Instead, she carried a slate and stylus. Her team protested. The commander ordered her not to deviate from pre-approved content. But she went in anyway. Theta 9 was already waiting. She knelt down in front of the glass and drew the first symbol, the spiral. It cocked its head. Then she added a second shape beside it. A crude figure. 2 legs. 2 arms. A dot for a head. She pointed to herself. "I," she said softly. Then she pointed to the spiral. "Remember." Then she drew the jagged form. She said nothing. Theta 9 lowered its massive body to match her level. Carefully, slowly, it raised one claw and scratched a new symbol into the floor, one she hadn't seen before. A square with a hollow center. Then it tapped that shape 3 times with its claw. She copied it onto her slate. Raised it. Nodded. The creature made a low sound, not a growl, not a hiss. A resonance. A vibration. Almost a hum. That night, the security logs recorded no activity in its cell. The next morning, someone left a message on Mara's console. Transfer advanced. Dissection scheduled in 36 hours. Prepare all cognitive records for asset migration. She didn't breathe for a full 30 seconds. Then she did something she had sworn not to do. She sat in front of the private terminal, opened her personal log, and pressed record. "If anyone ever sees this," she said quietly, "I need you to understand something. It isn't a threat. It's a memory. A walking archive of something we don't know how to translate yet. We keep calling it a predator, but predators don't mourn. They don't wait by the glass for a story." She hesitated, voice cracking. "My mother used to tell me stories during the bombings. We'd sit in the underground shelter and pretend the walls weren't shaking. She'd whisper fairy tales into my ear to keep the panic away. That's what stories are. Not information. Not noise. They're armor. Against the dark." She paused again. Then closed the log. Then she made a decision. The final session of the day began without authorization. Mara locked the chamber from inside and muted the external feed. She brought no guards. No books. Only her voice. She knelt again. This time closer. "I'm going to try something," she whispered. "But if you understand, if you remember, then show me. Please." She drew a sequence of symbols. Mountain. Spiral. Hollow square. Stick figure. And then a new one, a small triangle under an arc. She gestured to her chest, then drew it again. "Safe," she said. Theta 9 was motionless. For a breath. Then it moved. Not to attack. Not to threaten. It reached forward with both hands and pressed its claws flat to the glass. Mara did the same. She didn't flinch. Neither did it. Behind the glass, in the monitoring room where unauthorized data still funneled through silent channels, an analyst stared at the final telemetry readout. Subject Theta 9, elevated oxytocin analog detected. Aggression response, null. The creature was bonding. And Mara Lorne had less than 36 hours before they tore that bond apart. Mara hadn't eaten in nearly 24 hours. Her stomach was as tight as the steel corridors she kept walking through, every footstep echoing back at her like a ticking clock. She barely noticed. The symbols Theta 9 had scratched into the floor kept looping in her mind, replaying with the urgency of a dream that might vanish the moment you woke up. The square with the hollow center. The spiral. The broken mountain. They weren't random. They were a sentence. Maybe even a scream. She stood over the latest scan, blown up across her lab monitor, and tried to find a way to translate instinct into language. The AI couldn't do it. The linguists were guessing. But Mara was starting to feel it, not decipher it, not analyze it, but feel what the creature was trying to say. The center square repeated most often. It was always drawn with greater pressure, sometimes scratched twice into the metal as though Theta 9 didn't trust the surface to hold it. When she pointed to the symbol and said, "Safe," it had remained still. But when she'd said, "Home," it had looked away. There was a difference. She scrolled back through her own recordings. Dozens of sessions, thousands of lines of dialogue and readings. But it was the silences that mattered. The still pauses between sentences. The creature's breath, the subtle shifts in its posture. It wasn't just responding. It was remembering. At precisely 14:03 hours, an override signal appeared on her terminal. No warning. No preamble. Transfer imminent. Asset acquisition begins in 12 hours. Stand down all personal interactions. She stared at it for a long time. Then, slowly, she reached into her satchel and removed a single piece of slate. Not a screen. Not a tablet. A black slab of pressed chalkstone she'd kept from her university years, tucked away like a talisman. She placed it on the desk and traced the hollow square symbol onto it. Then she whispered, "Tell me your story." An hour later, she walked back into the observation chamber, escorted by 2 guards who refused to make eye contact. She didn't bring books. She didn't bring data pads. She brought the slate. Theta 9 was already there, crouched like a sentinel. Waiting. She knelt, raised the slate, pointed to the hollow square. What is this? It tapped the glass. Then it did something she hadn't seen before. It turned its hand and drew with the edge of one claw on its own armored forearm. The same shape. Slowly. Carefully. She drew it back. Matched it. Then added the stick figure beside it. Herself. She pointed. My home. She added another figure. Smaller. A dot for a head. Just beside hers. The creature watched. Then, to her shock, it leaned down and began etching new marks onto the titanium floor. Not the usual geometric scratches. These had flow. Form. A story told in abstract language that spoke straight past the brain and into the gut. She watched it draw a circle surrounded by tiny hatch marks, stars. Then a jagged shape, mountains. Then a series of small ovals clustered together like eggs. And then, fire. Or something like it. Sharp downward strokes radiating from above, piercing the ovals. Mara's breath caught. She pointed. Children. The creature paused. Then nodded. Her voice cracked. You protected them. It looked at her, and for the first time since their sessions began, Mara felt a soul staring back. What kind of civilization had this being come from? One that raised its young under stars and stone? One that had lost them all, burned, captured, destroyed, and left the last guardian alive not to avenge but to remember? She swallowed the lump in her throat. They're gone, aren't they? The predator exhaled. Not a growl. Not a hiss. A sound that quivered at the edges of grief. She stood. Couldn't bear to stay seated anymore. Her voice lowered. You're not a weapon. No response. You're not a prisoner. Still nothing. She walked to the far end of the observation room. Turned back to face the creature. Her next words were quiet, but sharp enough to cut through every layer of steel between them. You're a survivor. That's when it stood. All 7 feet of it, rising with the silent elegance of something ancient and unstoppable. But it didn't move toward the glass. It simply stood there, watching her, as if the weight of her words had shifted something in its core. In the command center, red lights blinked. Not alarms, yet, but warning indicators. The creature's body temperature was rising. Neural activity spiking. Its vitals weren't preparing for violence. They were preparing for action. Mara turned toward the door and found Commander Halvers waiting just outside. Your privileges are revoked, he said without preamble. You've breached containment protocol for the last time. Her fingers curled at her sides. It's not hostile. You don't know that. I do. It lost everything and still chose to listen. You've had your time. Now it's ours. She stepped forward, voice low. You're going to cut it open and study how it screams. That's not science. That's desecration. Halvers didn't flinch. You don't understand the stakes. The Union wants results. Bioadaptives. Memory-locked command control. This thing could make entire squads obsolete. It could make entire species trust again. That earned a pause. But not a concession. Go back to your quarters, Doctor. Effective immediately. They locked her out of the lab. Locked her out of the system. Revoked every access key she had spent 5 years earning. They thought that would stop her. They didn't know the story wasn't over. That night she opened a secure, offline console. Not to hack the system. Not to sabotage anything. But to create something the creature could understand. A story. Told in its language. It took her hours. She redrew every symbol she'd learned. Wove them together. Created a sequence that told of stars, of war, of the last one standing. She included herself, a small figure beside the hollow square. Then she drew a third figure, larger than herself, different in shape, but standing beside her with one claw outstretched. Not as a monster. As a companion. She encoded it into a low-band transmission and left the device in the corner of her last observation room, buried under old data readers. She hoped Theta 9 would find it after the transfer began. But fate didn't wait. At 0300 hours, 2 hours before scheduled extraction, a silent breach triggered in Cell 9. Cameras went dark. Power failed across a 3-room radius. By the time Halvers arrived, 5 guards were unconscious, none killed, and the containment doors were bent open like someone had peeled them apart with their bare hands. Mara was gone from her quarters. Theta 9 was gone from its cell. The last captured frame showed the creature lifting her into its arms as lights flickered and failed. Her eyes were closed, head resting against its shoulder. She wasn't resisting. She was asleep. Or maybe, finally at peace. Mara opened her eyes slowly, instinctively bracing for pain. But none came. She wasn't in a lab. Not on a cold floor or a steel cot. The room around her hummed with low power, dim emergency lights casting slow pulses across the walls. She recognized the angular ridges of Maintenance Corridor 3C. Remote. Forgotten. A dead end buried deep in the station's understructure. And she wasn't alone. Theta 9 crouched beside her, a silent sentinel. Its body shielded the entry, shoulders taut like a drawn bowstring. One claw twitched rhythmically against the floor, not from nerves, but from calculation. Waiting. How long? She murmured, voice hoarse. The creature turned slightly. Just enough for her to see its eyes. They were alert. Watchful. But not afraid. Something had shifted in the hours since the escape. She saw it in the way it moved. Before, Theta 9 had carried itself like a prisoner, muscles always tensed, always anticipating harm. Now, it moved like someone with purpose. With agency. As though it had made a choice, not a break. She sat up, wincing. Her ribs were bruised, but nothing was broken. You saved me. No response. Just a tilt of the head. Then, slowly, it reached toward the ground with one claw and began drawing again. This time not a single symbol, but many. A sequence. It scratched them into the dust-covered floor plate like a child retelling a dream. She recognized them instantly. The hollow square. The stick figure. The triangle under the arc. But this time the story didn't end there. He added a fourth shape. A curved line beneath two figures arched upward. A bridge. Mara stared at it, breath-catching. She hadn't taught it that symbol. It was new. The creature had invented it. She reached out, touching the symbol gently. Together. The hum of approaching boots shattered the moment. Theta 9 stood in an instant, head jerking toward the corridor entrance. The sound was subtle, disciplined, but the predator's senses had no equal. Mara pushed herself to her feet, still dizzy, still aching, but lucid enough to see what was coming. We have to go. They moved together, fast but low, slipping through maintenance shafts Mara had memorized during her first year on the station. Back then she'd thought it childish to explore like that, like hiding in vents made her special. Now those pathways were the only thing between them and death. Behind them shouts echoed. Halvar's voice, furious and clipped, barking orders. They were sealing off sectors, deploying stun foam, threatening lethal force. Mara didn't look back. She couldn't. The creature followed her lead now, an ironic inversion of every protocol. No longer a captive. No longer a case study. A living being who had placed its fate in human hands. Her hands. As they reached the emergency hangar, small, rarely used, always half-powered, she prayed the secondary shuttle was still docked. It was. She sprinted across the platform, slammed her hand against the override panel, and prayed her old clearance still lingered in the buffer. A miracle. The bay hissed open. She turned, breathless, to see the creature hesitate on the threshold. It looked at the stars visible through the hull window. Then at her. Mara nodded once. We go together. Theta 9 entered. The shuttle lifted off just as containment doors began to close around them. Mara's heart pounded against her ribs as warning klaxons screamed across the hangar. A half-dozen soldiers appeared behind the ceiling blast doors, weapons raised. She glimpsed Halvars in their midst, fury carved into every line of his face. He shouted something. She couldn't hear him. But she saw the moment he realized he couldn't stop it. The shuttle cleared the station's gravity lock and burst into the open dark, stars wheeling around them. For a moment Mara just sat there breathless. Then, slowly, she activated manual controls and steered the shuttle into a burn vector toward neutral space. We'll have 10 minutes before they track us, she said, voice low. But after that, we'll be out of their jurisdiction. Theta 9 didn't respond. It moved to the forward viewport and crouched there, watching the stars stretch and blur. Then, something remarkable happened. It reached forward and touched the glass, claws splayed like fingers. Then it turned its head and made a sound, not a growl, not a hum. It spoke. Just one sound. Oh, hollow. Deliberate. It made the symbol for home. Mara didn't breathe. She sat forward, tears stinging her eyes. Is that where you want to go? The creature didn't look at her, but its hand stayed on the glass. Then it turned and did something even more human than speech. It sat beside her. Shoulder to shoulder. In silence. They drifted in that quiet for a long time, the shuttle coasting on low burn, engines sighing beneath them like lullabies. Mara set the ship to autopilot and leaned back, her pulse finally easing. Her body was sore, but her mind was still awake, still moving. The station would recover. Halvers would cover his failure. She would be hunted. But she had seen something they hadn't. Not just in the creature, but in herself. It wasn't about saving an alien life form. It was about choosing, for once, not to destroy what we didn't understand. She glanced at the creature beside her. I think I finally understand your story. Theta 9 made a low rumble. Not threatening. Not uncertain. Almost amused. She smiled. It wasn't about war. Or loss. It was about love. They sat in quiet agreement. Behind them the stars kept moving. A week later, at a classified debriefing, Halvers would insist that Subject Theta 9 had breached protocol and escaped using unauthorized tech. He'd downplay the emotional link. Suppress the recordings. Delete every symbol Mara had traced. He would end his report with a single line. Asset lost. Classified threat. Inactive. But far beyond the station, deep in a sector without names, a shuttle glided into orbit around a world that no one had visited in centuries. Green light bathed the viewport. The surface shimmered with crystalline valleys and cracked stone domes. Not ruins. Graves. Mara watched the creature lower its head as the planet rotated beneath them. She didn't speak. There was no need. Some stories didn't require words. Later, as they landed on the softest plateau, she read to it one final time. The same story she'd first read in the lab, the Forest King and the Moonchild. She didn't finish it. The creature did. With a sound that wasn't quite a voice. But wasn't just a memory either. They sat together under alien stars, and for the first time since its kind had vanished, Theta 9 was not alone. And for the first time in her life, neither was she. Because the monster they'd locked away in a cage hadn't needed chains. It had needed someone to tell it a story. And someone brave enough to listen when it told its own. The end. The child looked up at Mara with wide, unsure eyes. Is it true? Mara knelt beside her, letting the old leather-bound book rest on her knee. Which part? That the monster never hurt anyone. That he just wanted to hear the end of the story. Outside the wide glass panels of the observation dome, a pale blue sun cast morning light across the hills of the new colony. Wind brushed through the tall silver grass, humming softly across the plain, a melody shaped by alien air. Behind the girl, a group of students murmured. The lesson had ended, but the story hadn't. Mara nodded gently. Not a monster. Just someone no one listened to. The girl was quiet for a long moment, then said, "What happened to him after?" Mara looked up toward the sky. High above the horizon, the old scout vessel floated in orbit, refitted into a mobile archive. From here you couldn't see its markings, but she didn't need to. She'd memorized every scratch on its hull. He's still watching, Mara said softly. Just not from a cage. The girl frowned. Why didn't the others believe you? Mara smiled, not bitterly but with the soft ache of memory. Because fear is louder than truth most days. Behind her, the door to the habitat clicked open. A quiet thrum entered the room before the figure did. Broad, silent, unmistakable. Children gasped. A few stepped back instinctively. One dropped their data tablet. The youngest cried out, "It's him." Theta 9 didn't react. It didn't need to. It had grown used to eyes. It had learned which ones were afraid and which ones were simply watching. Today most were the latter. It stood at the threshold, enormous but calm, its movements deliberate and peaceful. Around its arms were finely engraved bands, symbols from its old language, now part of the colony's curriculum. Memory etched into motion. Mara stood slowly and approached him. They didn't speak. He extended a clawed hand. She placed the book in it. Together they turned to the students. "I think," she said gently, "he'd like to read this one today." They sat together beneath the open sky, surrounded by children who had learned that monsters were not born but named. That war was not the only inheritance species could leave behind. And that a story told with patience could unmake fear itself. In time the universe would forget the facility. It would forget the cold white lights, the kill switches, the locked doors. But it would remember the story. The one about the predator who wouldn't let anyone close. Until someone read him a bedtime tale. And stayed to listen when he told his own. The beginning.